Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Niner Knowledge, caring for one another as we age. My name is Josh England. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Networks here at the UNC Charlotte Alumni Association. We're happy to have you here with us today. This is our fourth webinar around the Niner Knowledge series. We've had plenty of webinars before, and we'll have plenty coming. So we hope you keep a lookout for upcoming topics and opportunities to join us. Um, Today we have three wonderful panelists joining us. We will introduce them shortly. A couple quick notes about the webinar. You can use the Q&A function to ask any questions you may have of the panelists. You can also use that function if you are running into any technical issues or any other questions arise or pop up. Our staff will be monitoring that Q&A throughout the session. We will be about an hour long. This is being recorded, so if you were unable to stay for the whole time or need to leave early, you can access the recording later on. We will send that via email after the event. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Jody Kaplan, the Associate Vice Chancellor for Alumni Engagement, who will introduce our panelists.
Thank you very much, Josh. And thank you all for joining us for Niner Knowledge. We're really excited about this new initiative, and we'll be heading into year 2 now. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I get the great pleasure to introduce our panelists today. We are honored to welcome 3 distinguished experts who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to today's conversation on aging, caregiving, and family dynamics. Let's start with Dr. Cynthia Hancock. She's a teaching professor of sociology and director of the gerontology program at UNC Charlotte. Dr. Hancock is a nationally recognized educator and fellow of multiple gerontology organizations. She focuses on experiential learning and the study of aging in diverse contexts, earning numerous awards for her contributions to the field. Next up, Susan Jameson, class of 1978, is the managing director of Wealth Matters, LLC. Her professional experience is in estate planning, family office management, and charitable giving. Susan has decades of experience serving high net worth families, and she's deeply committed to philanthropy and advancing meaningful community impact. Susan's a very proud alum, and she also serves as a member of our foundation board. Last, Dr. Diane Zablotsky is a professor of sociology at UNC Charlotte. She's an accomplished scholar whose work is centered on aging, healthcare, and the social impacts of HIV/AIDS on midlife and older Americans. She's held key academic leadership roles, including faculty director of the Levine Scholars Program, and continues to inspire students through her teaching and mentorship. Together, these 3 will share valuable insights to help us better understand and navigate the complexities of aging, family care, and planning for the future. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Cynthia Hancock. Take it away.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jody. I will simply say you all can find the abstract on the first slide. And then I think Diane Zablotsky is going to go ahead and go through our outline. And Josh is going to share the slides to get us going. So I will do a quick hand over to Diane to go over our outline for today.
Thank you so much, and welcome to everybody who's taking the time out to participate in this conversation. The abstract is there for your future reference. I won't read it to you, but it does sort of tell you our goals of the next hour. What we hope to do, as reflected in the outline, is first give you some broad context for what we want to talk about. And when we talk about caring across the life course or caring as we age, we're going to just spend a minute or 2 talking about what the life course is and how it works in terms of a perspective for understanding our place in our kind of social experience. Then we're going to transition a little bit to the statistics and settings in which we care. And again, with a reminder that although a lot of us are joining this conversation today because we're caring about the older adults in our families and networks, we actually are simultaneously part of multiple settings and networks, and we're going to talk about how that fits together. We'll transition then to some more informative, factual kind of information about different kinds of care, different settings of care, who cares, for whom do we care, and what does that mean? And then we're going to continue to discuss the challenges and rewards of caregiving, which come in multiple ways and in multiple kinds of settings. And then to round out the discussion, we'll spend some time on the financial considerations that can be planned for, financial considerations in terms of implementing those plans, financial considerations across elder care and taking care of the folks that we want to make sure are healthy and safe and vital. And then hopefully you'll have some really wonderful questions for us, and that will continue to drive our discussion. So starting first with caring across the life course, I think the first thing I would like to do is remind us all that we exist in networks, we exist in family networks, we exist in our communities. And from the time we are kids to the time we are well into our older years, we are in supportive and reciprocal relationships. We give and we take, we support and we are supported. We help and we receive assistance. And those are the qualities that characterize relationships. And they're the reasons that we work. Sociologically, we actually have a pretty good idea of what to expect and what we can expect of family members and friends and colleagues and community members, because we have norms that tell us what's a reasonable expectation and what we should be expected to be called upon to give. So we'll talk about that for just a minute. Social support is generally something that we all enjoy, but there are also some tensions in giving and receiving social support, because we exist in multiple networks at the same time. So each of us, if you take 1 second, and I'll ask you a couple of times in my 10 minutes of the conversation, to reflect on your own place, where you are in families, and how your families are both the families that you were born into, your families of origin, and the families that some of us create, and they can be created in all kinds of ways. We belong to multiple networks in our faith organizations and our perhaps paid and unpaid labor organizations and our community advocacy organizations, and the multiple ways that we connect to each other and support each other. And then one of the things that you'll hear come up every once in a while, and I'll talk just a minute about changing American family context, and that's a definition of fictive kin. And again, if we think about our own experiences, a lot of us have people in our lives that support us, and we support as if we were related in a kinship network. And that's why it's families of choice or fictive kin. And many of us grew up with aunts and uncles that really weren't our parents, brothers or sisters, but they were close to us, and we expected that emotional tie, and we freely gave and received support. So the first thing in this slide that we'd like you to think about is those networks in which you exist. The next thing I want to just kind of bring up is the life course perspective. And Dr. Hancock and I joke that we usually spend 3 to 15 weeks talking about the life course perspective, and I'm going to go over it in 90 seconds. It's a perspective that allows us or encourages us to see ourselves as individuals in broader social environments. We are physical creatures, we are social creatures, we belong in a cultural context. And so the first thing we're reminded of is the multiple selves we are as we go through our lives. And then there's some other kinds of ways of looking at how we age. The first idea, which many of you have heard of, is a birth cohort. And a birth cohort basically is who are the folks that were born at around the same time we are, or have been born. And we are mostly aware of the cohorts that we were born into. So I'm obviously a baby boomer. And that membership, being born in those 2.5 decades or so, placed me with other people who aged as other things happened in the country, in our society, the expectations, the opportunities, both in education and work, our expectations based on our gender identities. So birth cohorts sort of anchor us with the other folks who are going to have the same historical journey. Each of us, though, are also individuals. And so we also live our lives with transitions, things about education, our choices for work or labor force participation, things that may happen to us, like the death of a parent or an illness. And so what the life course helps us do is also reflect and experience the individual opportunities or choices or transitions or occurrences that happen to us as we go through our lives. The two things that I think are most critical for examining not only care across the life course, but how we look and work with each other is that the choices or opportunities we have at one point in time may influence the kind of opportunities or experiences we have later in our lives. For example, when you have your children in your early 20s, and maybe you have one or two children in your early 20s versus having three or four children in your late 30s or early 40s. Those are not right or wrong decisions, but it's not hard to imagine that the people who make those two choices or have those two experiences are going to have very different experiences in their 50s and 60s when they launch their children, what it means for their financial well-being, all those kinds of things. And then finally, the last thing we have to recognize is that not everybody is born with the same advantages or disadvantages or challenges, or however we want to think of it, that we intersect ourselves as individuals with the place we are in history and in society, and then we move across our own personal time. And that combination of forces and that combination of experiences is what helps us make a unique journey for all of us, but also allows us to see some ties socially across the board. So it's a perspective that we use a lot when we talk about family care. The next thing that I think is interesting to think about is what's caring. And again, we get those notions about care. And so while we won't ask you to express your answers, I would like you to take just a second about what you feel care is, both on the receiving end and on the providing end. When do you feel cared for? How do you express care? Is it at the social level, at the emotional level? Is it financial? Do we all express care the same way? And the answer is that there are multiple ways. And there are sometimes, and sociologists have looked at the gendered where we express care or concern or emotion. And so we do change and grow, and we bring people into our lives, and there are other people who we either leave or are taken from us. But all across our lives, we give emotional support, we give personal and social exchanges, and we often give instrumental care. And that's something that we talk about as it changes across the life course. Instrumental care can be thought of as the kind of physical care or the caretaking or the caregiving you're going to hear about in just a minute. And so that changes. That changes as you age. It changes as the people in your family age. That there is a need to be cared for, let's say, for example, between our childhood and our adolescence and our early adulthood, but what the balance is and what the expectations are and what we're able to do for each other do change. And then finally, we talk a lot, and I'm sure have had conversations about work-life balance. And balance is an important quest and it's an important goal, but it's not always easy to attain. And we'll talk a little bit about why there are multiple occurrences that throw us off balance. When our work and our family demands maybe are different, when we have multiple family demands across generations, maybe there's a change in our life, like we lose a partner, that's going to impact how we can give care to the other people in our lives, in our families, and our networks. So as we talk about caring, not only do we encourage you to think about what that means, both to give and receive, but also how the places in your life, the relationships in your life, the multiple things you want to achieve or express or experience in your life fit together sometimes or can cause tension sometimes. And so that leads us to just one more sort of notion of a lifetime of caring relationships. And that to me is a very important perspective that we see that not only as necessity, but it's something that we can embrace. And so again, you place yourself in networks, communities, families, and our broader society to say, how do we care for each other? What are the resources that we have? And emotion is a resource, finances are a resource, social support is a resource. So how do we want to manage those? And we be aware that they're dynamic? And then as we go through, I think the thing that we'll take away from this slide is that we are aware that things change. The contemporary American family is changing. Fertility is down, average life expectancy is up. And that if we look at our caring and our support as reciprocal across our whole lives, it is the reminder that we don't only parent our children, that we really can't parent our parents. That's really not something that is a reciprocity. We can care for our parents, we can support our parents, we can take on caregiving roles for our parents, but we never really become the parent and they don't become the child. That's an infantilization that is not good for anybody. And then as we move through this body of information, especially when we get to the financial end, we'll encourage you to think both in the short term and the long view for yourself, for the members of your family, the folks ahead of you generationally, or the folks behind you. And finally, the last thing that I'll just mention in the last slide of my portion of our conversation today is the statistics and the settings. And the major thing I would like you to take away from this slide on statistics and settings is that options for accessing formal care change across time. We don't want to make those choices. We don't want to make those choices in a panic or in an emergency situation. Formal care is what we purchase. It can be schedulable. It can be residential. There are multiple levels. Informal care can't be so scheduled. It has to be a combination of multiple things, all which have a trade-off. And so when we think about statistics and settings, the other thing that we want to be aware of is just how common caregiving is and how many of us do provide care at every level through our life course, how we do provide care for multiple people. We provide care sometimes for siblings, sometimes for children, sometimes for aunts and uncles, sometimes for friends and church neighbors and friends. So let's look at those statistics just for 1 second. In the next slide on caring statistics, what you're going to see is just how common a phenomenon this is. We are giving a lot of care. Millions of us are giving care to millions of people. It is not a totally gendered activity, but women report more than men do. The other thing to look at when I talked about intersecting and conflicting pressures is how many of us are employed while we're giving care, how many of us give care for more than one person. So as we recognize what a common phenomenon this is, I'd like to ask Cynthia to take the next portion and talk to you a little bit about what we know about the caregiving experience.
Thank you, Diane. So Diane is kind of laying a foundation for us so that we can think of caregiving much more broadly than a lot of people think about it. Sometimes we don't think about caregiving until, our parents are aging and they need support in a different way, when in reality, caring is part of our entire life journey. And that's a really important point that Dr. Zablotsky talked about that's important to keep as we continue to move forward. So when we think about caring, when we think about caregiving, we find that there are both rewards and challenges. So it's not rewarding for some and challenging for others. People who are in a caregiving situation, whether it's raising children, whether it's caring for aging parents, whether it's caring for a sick partner, there are rewards to that and there are challenges at the same time to that. So the research shows that 83% of caregivers report a positive experience in the caregiving. They report personal growth. They've learned maybe to do something they didn't know how to do because of the caregiving situation. Enhanced self-esteem. Again, that kind of comes with personal growth, feeling better about our abilities and our sense of purpose and our sense of self. Strengthened relationships can come out of caregiving. Maybe you have aging parents and siblings. While there can be dynamics between siblings that can be challenging, it can also strengthen those relationships. It can strengthen the relationship between a parent and a child when that child sees their parent caring for their own aging parents, and it changes the level of respect and understanding for their parent and the kinds of things that they go through. Again, a sense of purpose. It gives us a sense of, well, this is really important and this is why I'm here and this is something that needs to be done today to help this other human being on the planet, whoever that human being is. There can be physical benefits. So caregiving can be very physical. And so sometimes, if we've got to get up and about and go and do things, that's a whole lot better for us than sitting on the couch and being a couch potato. So the movement that comes with caregiving can be actually good for our health, even though it can come at a cost if it becomes too difficult. And then again, building social connections, looking for networks of support, looking for support groups of people who are doing the same kind of caregiving. Maybe you're caring for someone with Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease, and you join a support group and you get to know other people and build social connections. And if gerontology teaches us anything, it's that the most important thing for well-being across the entire life course is strong social connections. And then some latest research actually suggests that people who are giving care to other people might actually extend their life compared to those who are not. And it's for all of the reasons that you see on this slide. I do want to point out the concept of respite. So respite is a break for the caregiver. Caregiving is tough work, no matter what kind of caregiving you're doing. If you're raising small children, parents need a break. If you are caring for aging parents, caregivers need a break. If you are caring for a spouse, you need a break. So we need to structure in, Diane talked about formal and informal caregiving. We need to structure in formal and informal respite. Can a neighbor come over and relieve you for a little bit? Can you join with a group of parents and trade off childcare just to give yourself a break? Are there places that you can pay to take a loved one to spend their day in a safe environment so that you can get a break? So while there are rewards, and I'm going to talk about challenges here in a minute, it is important to note the role of respite in the caregiving environment. So I want to talk about challenges next. And I want to start with just to get you to think about something. Hopefully the slide's going to come up. I don't see it. Yay, the slide. So one of the areas of work that I look at is the language we use around aging. Language is really important. Diane pointed out, things like we don't parent our parents because that language is infantilizing. It demeans what that person has gone through. One of the things we want to think deeply about is the language of independence. So if you are looking at the senior industry, there's a lot of selling of independence. Move here, we'll let you keep your independence. If you do everything right, you're not going to need others. You can rely on yourself. And that language is actually detrimental for many reasons. Partly because, number one, it's just not true. We all need people, as Diane pointed out, across our entire life course. The moment we're conceived, we depend upon the person carrying us in their womb to make good decisions and good choices for our well-being, right? And so if we think more in terms of interdependence and the fact that we need each other and we rely on each other through the life course, then when we hit our later years and we do need support in a different way, it's not all new and we've lost our independence and we have failed as a human being. It's just that how we need care has changed, and that's perfectly okay. And it's actually the reality. So our language framing is really important when we think about caregiving, particularly in later life. There are challenges, the emotional toll. Research shows that caregivers often report stress, anxiety, depression, guilt, isolation, burnout, definitely interpersonal conflicts. So again, you get interpersonal conflicts, but you also get strengthened relationships. So that's just a dynamic you're working through. Maybe while you're caring for aging parents in a crisis, your siblings and you are having a good bit of tension, but you work through it and you come out on the other side with stronger relationships and a greater appreciation for one another. There can be a physical toll. ADLs are activities of daily living. So I always tell my students, those are the things you need to get into someone's personal space to help them with. Maybe it's getting out of bed, maybe it's using the restroom, maybe it's eating. That can be physically demanding. If you've been a parent, you know how chasing kids can be exhausting. The nonstop of intensive ADL caregiving can create a physical toll. Again, respite care is really important. Sleep deprivation is not good for anyone, so you want to think about how you can work out so that is your sleep is addressed. And then there are reports of a decline in caregiver health. That absolutely can happen. And again, that's where strong support networks come into play. As Diane said, we want to use a combination of formal, paid, and informal, unpaid care to meet the needs of anyone in the caregiving environment. If you think of children today, daycare is so common. That's formal care. If you have neighbors help babysit, or that's informal care. And then time can be a challenge, balancing that work-family life that we've talked about already. And 70% of caregivers report challenges trying to balance work and family caregiving dynamics. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is the financial toll. Well, actually, also we're going to talk about that in a minute. I've got one more slide. The financial toll in caregiving, and we will address that in just a minute with Susan. I do want to show a quick video. So a video is next on our slides. Let me set this up. This is Dr. Bill Thomas, who is a geriatrician. It's a very short video, and it talks about this concept of upside risk. And I think it's really important to frame and think about our caregiving through the lens of upside risk. So let's take a minute and listen to that.
For those of us who work in long-term care, if there's one scary word, maybe the scariest word is risk. If you say the word risk, people are like, what? Because we're constantly afraid that something bad is going to happen. But we have to back up for just a minute and ask, what does the word risk actually mean? Well, what it really means is an outcome that's different than you expected. So what's the probability that the outcome is going to be worse than expected? That's downside risk. That's the bad kind of risk you lie awake at night worrying about. But there's a second kind of risk, the one that gets very little attention. It's called upside risk. What's the risk that things are going to turn out better than you expected? Well, what happens in long-term care is our obsessive concern about downside risk leads us to take away upside risk from elders. We actually prevent them from having outcomes that are better than expected because we want to minimize the risk that they'll have a worse outcome. That's not fair and it's not right, and there's no other part of the human life cycle where that's allowed. And it shouldn't be allowed in elderhood either. Our lives should include a balance of downside and upside risk. That's normal, healthy life, and we have to bring that kind of risk into long-term care.
So Dr. Thomas has written lots of books. If you get interested in his work, you can find him on YouTube. You can also find lots of resources that he has written. Again, he's a geriatrician and has spent a lot of his life in skilled nursing and has a perspective on elder care from that. So in terms of preparing for caregiving, we want to balance two things. We want to balance safety and autonomy. Autonomy, of course, is the right for a person to make choice for themselves, to have agency in their lives. But we also are, overwhelmingly concerned about safety, as Bill Thomas says. It's really important to honor a well-lived life and personal preferences for older adults, even when someone is living with dementia. We tend to take away their humanness when we look at the decline that can come with dementia, rather than stay focused on who that person was, what their story is, what they can still express. and the personal preferences that they have. So that's really important. Always include an elder in any conversations around any caregiving decisions. That's so very important. And then how do we prepare financially and legally? So again, this is a conversation that Susan's going to talk about, but a conversation that we ought to be having with those who are affected by the conversation. So Susan, it's all yours.
Thank you, Cynthia. And I'm going to share a little bit of my story from my mother, who is 91. So my sister and I are her caregivers. And so I have this concept of wealth expectancy. And the goal is to match wealth expectancy to life expectancy of the person you love. And so, how do you define their wealth expectancy? Is it maintaining their current lifestyle? In my mother's case, it meant moving to assisted living about 5 years ago. She had lived as a widow for 5 years and then decided she needed more support. So it was a reduction in her lifestyle. It involved selling the house, selling cars, and other assets. And then the other big challenge is, so you can figure out how much wealth someone has. The question is, what is their life expectancy? And of course, no one knows that. So the challenge is to try to run financial projections to give you at least the range. So in my mother's case, since I'm a CPA, I run all the numbers. My sister takes the role of all medical things related to mom, and I do financial. She can live to 99. She's 91 now. She does not want to live to 99. But we know we have her wealth expectancy based on where she lives now with inflation and, preparing for some additional care later in life, that she can make it to 99. And so the objective is really, you want to live the life that they want to and to have the income stream to support this and not really have them to have such distress over the financial and the stress among the family. So the next slide, we're going to talk about what I consider to be the common mistakes you see in financial planning. And all of these really relate to delayed planning. And by that, I mean the families were just not proactive early enough. It was delayed. So a lot of times people will delay planning until the crisis hits. And then, somebody's had a fall and broke a hip and needs to go somewhere. And the family is really not talked through the options. The other one is, of course, the failure to understand long-term care options. The facility my mom's at is $6,000 a month. I think that's probably about the national average, but it increases more than inflation every year. It has an inflation rate, I think, about a 5% since she's been there. So failure to understand really, if they do live to be 99, what's the total cost going to be? And then the other thing you see is a lot of people, if they do get panicky and they haven't thought it out, they'll just be like, well, let's sell some stock or let's sell a piece of land. And they really don't think through the consequences of that from either a tax or a legal perspective. So really these quick fire decisions often lead to less optimal results financially. Another one is failing to ignore estate and legal updates and documents. Number one, do they even have a will? Number two, where is it? Number three, who's the executor? Going over the basics of the documents they do have, and we're going to talk about that more in a little bit about what all they need, but you need to get that as part of your review cycle. And what I told mom was, when we were looking at her financials, I said, because a lot of parents are like, well, that's still my business. I've got a good mind. But I just told her we wanted to help her make the best decisions. And she was very, very open to having help and actually wanted somebody to look at everything. Another mistake is often not looking at the income tax consequences, especially if you sell an asset and not thinking through when you sell an asset. And then probably the most common mistake is this no communication among the family, so that only one sibling knows the financial plan, and the recommendations they come up with, the other siblings are not in agreement with, but maybe they don't see the big picture and they understand the wealth expectancy, but they haven't shared it. And so, one of Jody just said her biggest fear was outliving my money, and so, and it is good to share. Like I said, I'm the financial assistant for my mom. My sister is the healthcare assistant. She takes care of all doctors, medical testing, and all that. But then we both communicate what's happening on the medical and the health front monthly of what's going on with mom. Let's get into how we review the options. So what you really have to do, there's no easy work here. This is extensive. So you have to do a financial assessment. Like I say, you need to see all sources of income. Are they already taking Social Security? What do the IRA required distributions look like? Are they eligible for disability? Do they have veteran benefits? So you really have to look at everything involved. And then you have to look at the options if there are things they are not getting that they should be. And I'm going to give you some resources later on. There's a lot of good sites on the web now for assisting in that. And then revise the financial plan based on what you found out. Maybe they were paying for things that they didn't need, or maybe their Medicare supplement insurance options weren't the best for the person. So it's really like a financial audit. It really is. And there are people that can assist if no one is in your family that has the skill set or the time to do it. And then last of all, once you do this work, share it with the family. It's no good if only one child has it in a binder. So please share it. So next slide, I'm going to go into a few more details. The hardest thing, I think, is getting the passwords. I think the passwords, especially if they have to start to have a little mental decline, passwords for accounts are really hard to get. But you really need to get the personal financial statement and all account numbers and passwords if you have them. Look at their bank statements, look at their tax returns, see if there's any sources of incomes that you didn't know about. Also look at disbursements that you don't know about. A lot of times people set up stuff on auto draft, like for a gym or something 20 years ago. Well, there's not going anymore, So be sure to look for all the incoming outflow and make sure they're appropriate for the life they have now. Another big thing to do, of course, now I usually work on the very wealthy end of the scale, except for my mom, but is if they have a lot of other assets, look at the asset allocation. Are they taking too much risk in the stock market? Do they need more CDs and bonds? Really, what are the assets supposed to do? So really look at that, work with a financial advisor to make sure they understand what the family is trying to accomplish. If you have illiquid assets, a lot of time real estate, the family may own a big piece of real estate. They really wanted to pass it down to the kids. Is that going to be an option, or is it going to need to be sold and invested in income producing assets? And of course don't forget the taxes, because a lot of these people, the assets they own, they've had over 40 years and the income tax basis is very low. And then planning for the primary residence is probably the most complicated part. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but there are a lot of good websites related to that. That's particularly critical if you think that the person is going to need to be apply for Medicaid. The primary residence will become a big part of that planning. On the next slide, we're going to talk about the residents. Oh, and I forgot one other thing on the other slide. Also, be protective about their credit. And so consider freezing their credit or making the credit cards with a smaller limit. For like my mom, Amazon is her big friend. She has a credit card, but it has a $500 limit. We do not allow her to have much cash because where she is, there are a lot of people in and out of her apartment. So we mainly just give her cash for her hair and other beauty things. But you know, that's really important too, that they still feel like they have some independence, that she feels like she knows how much she can tip her hairdresser. But anyhow, back to the house. Okay. The house is, like I say, especially if there's Medicaid eligibility issues, you know, you've got the 5-year look back rule. So you want to, if you're going to do any planning, the sooner the better is the rule with the houses, you know. Also, another trap some people get into is the parents move out, they keep the house and sell and rent it for a few years and then sell it. But you have to really watch out that in order to have the exclusion on the primary residence apply for tax purposes, one of them has to live there 2 of the last 5 years. So again, just planning for the primary residence is one that takes a lot of thought. And then a reverse mortgage is something that you could look at as well. So I would say a lot of disagreements among families relate to the house, you know, and it may be informally that, you know, Daddy said I could get the house and the land. Well, that wasn't actually in the will, but you know, so this is a thing that you need to avoid conflict by actually sharing what the plan is early on. And now I'm going to switch into talking about legal documents. And luckily in this area, there's been a lot of advancement in elder care law. And there's a lot of good lawyers now that are just specialized in this and just have much more a big, robust practice of how to handle a lot of these things. I would say you need several documents. You need a financial power of attorney. You need that before somebody starts having diminished capacity. So that needs, if they don't have one, that needs to be on your list. Of course, they need a healthcare power of discerning would decide, you know, the care given based on certain circumstances. A living will is another document. It's sometimes called living will and desire for natural death. That means I don't want to be plugged up to a ventilator. And, you know, like my mom has a do not resuscitate now. She really doesn't want to live to 99. So she has a do not resuscitate in her documents. Another important one that the hospitals will give you are the HIPAA release, which means the person that's going to make the healthcare decisions must have all the data. And so another thing to think about is getting access to their my charts, their medical records, because that is just giving you can get the after visit notes and all, so you can become much more current as to what they're really facing with the doctors if you're not able to go to every appointment. There are also trusts you can do, especially to protect the primary residence. If you do have trusts that are in existence, who is the trustee? How do you get money out? What can the money be used for? So a lot of sophisticated planning can be done if it's a person of substantial wealth. And so you would need to get all that done before capacity also becomes an issue. Then look at all insurance contracts. Look at their health, their life, disability. A lot of times long-term care policies now sometimes may have a small life insurance benefit. And so be sure and make sure you know what all they have and understand the benefits of everything. So that is all of my part. I think Cynthia's going to come back on and we're going to look at the Q&A chart here.
All right, thank you, Susan. So I really just wanted to take a moment and reflect back on some of the key things that were mentioned. There's, of course, a lot mentioned in here. I know you'll get the recording and you'll be able to rewatch it. But some important takeaways. Caregiving is something that happens across our entire life course, and we use formal and informal caregiving to make that happen. It's not just something that starts in our later life. Life course really helps us understand how we can make sense of caregiving in life course. Diane didn't say this term, but this term came to mind, the concept of linked lives, which simply means we're connected. What happens to one of us can affect another one of us. And so between linked lives, how we're connected together, and the historical time that we're coming through, Caregiving can look different for different people. Caregiving can be gendered. We tend to think of women as caregivers, but I also know a lot of the research doesn't ask questions about the kinds of things that men do give care for. So sometimes we miss that. I'll share, like Susan, I have 91 and 92-year-old living parents and two brothers, thank goodness. And between the three of us, we divide the work and work with our parents to try to make sure that their needs are met. And so two brothers, I'm so thankful for them. They do a lot. There are many ways to care: instrumental caregiving, what tasks need done, emotional support, again, formal, paid, and informal. And then Susan made some really, gosh, so many important points. My parents live in long-term care. I have one in skilled nursing and one in assisted living. And if you want your mind blown a little bit, their costs were over $20,000 a month. So this is something that's really important to plan for as you look at long-term care. And if you consider long-term residential care, one of the most important questions you can ask is what happens if the money runs out? Because we can plan, like Susan says, but we can't always know 100% how long a person is going to live. And so that's a really important question. I loved your suggestion about passwords. That became something so important to me and my brothers when my dad had diminished capacity and we could not get into so many things. So as a minimum, if you have access to the email and can reset passwords, that kind of solves the I've got to have a password for everything thing. And so just a lot to think about. The last slide we just threw in case you want to continue your lifelong learning. We do have resources. We're not selling gerontology here, but if you become curious about learning more about older adults and aging, we do have options in the gerontology program. As Susan reminded us in our planning, the Belk College of Business, of course, has good opportunities to learn as well. And I know that Josh is going to send out some of those opportunities with a follow-up email.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, thank you to all three of our presenters. I know that we asked you to share a lot of information, Dr. Hancock, as we talked about, essentially a year's worth of information in 45 minutes. So I appreciate your dedication to this program and to getting this information out. We do have a few questions. Questions are still open. So if you have questions as we go through, we can answer them as we go. The first one comes from Robin. How are trusts and wills different?
I'll take that one. Okay. So a will, it's called your last will and testament, and it says where your property will go when you die. A trust can be done in lifetime or at death. And a lot of times trusts are done when there are significant assets that need to be managed. But trusts can also be done for less wealthy people, especially related to Medicaid planning. And a trust just says you have a grantor who sets up a trust and puts property in it, and then they appoint a trustee to manage that. And so then if you have a parent that has already established trust, you need to look at those trusts and see, are there any revisions that could be made? If they were revocable, you could make some revisions. But that's really, if they have trust, you're really going to need to probably talk to an elder care lawyer. And another thing, Josh, I had a bunch of websites I forgot to say that were really good. AARP.com is a really good resource for planning. National Council on Aging, longtermcare.gov, and we're going to put these in the follow-up notes. If you want a book, there's a book called Elder Care Planner that's very good. And then AARP has a checklist that's one of the best I have seen. And then for North Carolina, if you have particular North Carolina Medicaid questions, the best site I found on that was northcarolinahealthcoverage.org. So I asked Chat GPT to give me some of the best resources. And luckily, there are just a lot more than there used to be. And then you can just search for financial planning resources under elder care. And I found some very good options.
Well, thank you, Susan. And Susan said we will be sharing all of this information post-event as well in the email follow-up, as well as the recording of this event. The next question is from Rebecca. She says, great session. Thank you, Rebecca. She's local to Charlotte and has an 80-year-old mother living in Texas. I think my question would be for Susan. My mom, over the years, has invested in various real estate transactions, primarily land, no homes. My sisters and I realize we will never live or build on this open land in Texas as we have established families in the Carolinas. I think we need to encourage my mom to sell this land in advance of her death and not leave this decision to the three daughters on how to divide and sell at a later time. Uh, any words of wisdom on real estate and or how to get started with the right questions to learn more about real estate taxes in different states?
Yes, I would say definitely you need to find a real estate expert in Texas. And this is a very good point about, do you sell something in lifetime versus do you wait until their transition, until they're passing? If you sell something in lifetime, there'll be a capital gain based on their basis. So whatever the mother had paid for this real estate in Texas, say 30 years ago, that's your tax basis. And if she sells it, she's going to have a capital gain. If the estate sells it, in other words, if she dies with it, it will get a step up in basis. And then if the estate sells it, there is no capital gain. So I would talk to her CPA probably as the first step and have them to run a projection of what it would look like to sell now versus later. But this is often things that luckily all three of you agree that no one wants it. What the usual conflict is, somebody wants some of the land, but there's differences opinions on what the value is. And so you get into this, what is equal versus what is fair. But I think you're doing a great job to identify the issue now, have conversations with your sisters. You've still got time to seek professional advice about highest and best use for that asset. And, the proceeds could then, fund her long-term care. So the real thing I think is know what they own and know if they owe anything. I had one friend that their mother had racked up a lot of credit card debt on just junk. I mean, she was just bored, I think, and they did not have a limit on that credit card. Back to my point, mom has a $500 Amazon limit, but I think, look for debt as well. Sometimes with diminished capacity, that's one of the first indicators. They may buy something 2 or 3 times. And so we kind of look at mom's Amazon bill. Sometimes it looks like it's the same dollar amount. We're like, Mom, did you buy something twice? But it was legitimate. But one of the patterns can be they buy the same thing over and over. And so really kind of credit card statements and bank statements can offer you a lot of clue into mental capacity. So just be diligent to look at that.
Thank you. Ashley asks, what are some good tips to encourage caregivers to take time for themselves? I see too often where they're scared to leave their loved one's side.
Well, I can speak to this. Diane might want to speak to this too. I was looking at the next question. I was all prepared for it. So the question again was, tell me what the question was. To
Sorry.
encourage people to take time for themselves.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, I think one of the best things you can do is look into spaces that might support that and learn to feel comfortable with that. There's lots of adult day centers if you're based in Charlotte. Many of them very, very good. And so I think go to visit, go see what's going on there, go see how the participants are engaging. I think just getting out and seeing what's out there can do a lot to alleviate the anxiety around letting your loved one exist in a space other than right under you 24/7. And the thing to think about is you are going to be a better caregiver if you have a break. You know, a abuse of older adults tends to happen more at the hands of family than non-family. And so I'm not saying people who aren't well rested or aren't taking a break are going to turn into abusers. That's not what I'm saying at all. But we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to find supportive solutions to help the network, that exists to care for that person holistically. I don't know, Diane, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just jump in if you're on the other side of the relationship and you're watching a caregiver who's overburdened and who's feeling overwhelmed. And I think part of what can work is reminding them about the things that Cynthia just said in terms of being an optimal caregiver means that you have some respite. But the other thing we find in support giving is that we often say the generic, I'll help you any way I can, or, you tell me what you need. And when you're overwhelmed, it's hard to articulate to a supportive partner what you need. And so the same thing happens after a death and a bereavement period is that instead of saying, if you need anything, call me, is that you bring that care provider into a conversation and say, would it help you if I came over for 2 hours while you went and got a haircut? Would it be okay, or would you be comfortable with me staying with your care recipient while you went to your house of worship on a Sunday morning? And so part of it, I think, is also in encouraging the person to know, the care provider to know the benefit for everybody involved when you get some respite care, but also giving them the opportunity to think in small parts how they can get a little bit of a break in a way that they have told you they are comfortable with. That would be my only other suggestion is, something concrete, starting out with something very direct, like a haircut or a trip to the grocery store or a walk. And so that doesn't make the leaving of the care recipient such a big deal. It's small, it's confined, it's purposeful, and then you can, I think, build from there often.
And I would also just add, and I didn't say this, adult day centers, it's not a 40-hour a week thing. You can get 1 day a week. You can get 2 days a week, so whatever you need to build into your caregiving plan in your caregiving network, paid respite care can just be part of that plan.
Thank you. Robin asks, what does happen in most CRCCs if the money runs out?
So a CCRC stands for a Continuing Care Retirement Community. The current lingo for that is Life Plan Community. So if you're looking for a CCRC, you might also want to look up Life Plan Community. Life Plan communities tend to have a larger entrance fee. And so that entrance fee gets you in. That life plan community is going to look at your assets and do the kind of things Susan talked about and make a determination as to whether your assets are going to support you given your possible life expectancy in terms of staying in that life plan community. Having said that, if you are looking at long-term care, you need to bluntly ask the question, what happens if the money runs out? And you need to get it written. When my parents moved into their life plan community, we were told there were scholarships available. And my parents went on scholarship in May because after 3 years of $20,000 a month, they needed scholarship. And so some CCRCs operate on a scholarship model. Typically not your for-profit CCRCs, typically your faith-based, not-for-profit CCRCs, but ask the question, ask who is running the CCRC, who owns the CCRC, all that good stuff. And that's the best answer I've got for that.
Thank you. One last question. We have some questions we weren't able to get to. We will attempt to answer those outside of this session and then provide you individually with answers for some of the questions we were not able to get to. Kathy asks, what are the best resources to find affordable independent living for seniors in the Charlotte area, specifically looking for senior subsidized apartments?
Well, I'll jump in again, but then be happy for my colleagues to jump in. One of the resources you might start working with is someone called a geriatric care manager. So one of the geriatric care manager organizations in Charlotte is called Caregiving Corner. The founder and creator is actually a graduate of our gerontology program, so she's well steeped in gerontology. But a geriatric care manager can help you navigate not just that kind of question, but all kinds of questions when it comes to the kinds of things we're talking about. Typically somewhat affordable, but also many of them will work, depending upon your income for you in affordable ways. So my answer would be work with someone who knows. And the person who's going to know is going to be a geriatric care manager because they're going to know their community and know what's available in their local community.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it for our questions. We're right at our time. Thank you everyone for attending. Again, this was recorded, and so we will send out the recording to everyone who registered for the event. We also will have it living on our Lifelong Learning Niner Knowledge webpage on their alumni website. You can visit that at any point and look back at any of the previous Niner Knowledge webinars that we've hosted. We have our next one coming up in September. It is in person, September 17th in Uptown. We are doing an architecture tour of Uptown with a local architecture firm. So it'll be an hour-long tour over lunch of some of the famous pieces of the Charlotte skyline and how they came to be. So we look forward to seeing you there and have a great day. Go Niners.